Yeah, definitely. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Happy Friday. Buenos días. Espero que empezaron su viernes de la mejor manera. Please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you can, mention one thing that brings you joy this October. For me, it's, drinking coffee with chilly weather in the morning. And if you need closed caption, please click the CC at the bottom of the screen so that you can see the translated version, or translated written version in the language of your preference. Por favor, mencionen, introduzcanse en el chat y si pueden compartir algo que les trae alegría este octubre, por favor, compártanlo. Si necesitan traducción por escrito para la Junta en otro idioma, presionen la CC. Abajo es un botoncito y, y eso les va a ayudar. So I am your host today. If we haven't had a chance to meet, my name is David Loesa. I'm a member of the California Forward team. And more importantly, I am your neighbor here in Anaheim. So I'm excited to be here with you. I arrived as an immigrant 2.5 decades, and my family lives here. I studied in Orange County, and I'm as invested as you are in making sure that this county can prosper. So with that, let's turn to public comments.
So anyone not on the HRTC have any comments towards this process or any questions? Okay, David, seeing none on the attendee side.
Perfect. Now we'll move to the second item on the agenda, which is HRTC comments and updates. So do HRTC members have any updates on programs or activities that relate to the principles and values of SURF?
All right, David, hearing none. Let's keep this rolling.
Great. Now we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is occupational and industry assessment. I'll turn it over to Victor Negrete to share a little bit about SCAG's role in the report, and then introduce Dr. Crete.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jesse, and good morning to everyone. My name is Victor Negrete, as David said, and I'm the department manager at SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments for Inclusive Economic Growth. And just as a reminder, the SCAG region is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the regional planning agency, which covers 6 counties, including Orange County, and 191 cities in Southern California. And primarily, historically, our major charge is developing the region's long-range transportation plan and sustainable community strategy, which really guides the long-term development and growth of the region. And as some of you may recall, a few months back, I was invited to share on my particular team, and the Inclusive Economic Growth Department's overall work program, which I believe is very closely aligned and should be coordinated and with the SURF, because I think there's very, very similar goals and objectives ultimately. And today, we're coming back, and I'm very, very happy to introduce Dr. Jesse Crete from the Orange County Center of Excellence, who will be sharing more specifically on one of those projects that we're leading from the Inclusive Economic Growth team. And before I hand it over to Dr. Crete, I think there's a few things I want to share about to keep in mind as we go over the research that her team has taken on in partnership with SCAG. And so this research will ultimately inform a report that the SCAG team is developing around expanding access to good jobs in Orange County, as well as the other counties that we serve. And to keep in mind, there's many ways, as we all know, defining job quality and what are good jobs. And with this particular approach, we're building on work that the community colleges have done in the past, and really kind of co-developing the methodology behind it to reflect some of the priorities that SCAG as an organization really tries to incorporate into all of our work. And those would be equity and resilience. and those will show up, when we talk about family supporting jobs and living wages that can sustain a family. And Dr. Creek can talk more about what that means in this case, and really resilience. That we're looking at this through a lens of a workforce, that is resilient to various shocks, and we'll discuss what those are in the case of this research. But that's the first thing I wanted to share. Is that this is one approach of many, I think, to identifying good jobs, and this is really intended as kind of a first step, this research, in developing our report. And so as we SCAG move into the next step of developing our report, we're really going to lean on stakeholders like yourselves at the HRTC to share suggestions and feedback that will ultimately inform recommendations for expanding access and the number of these jobs in the region, as well as more equitable access to these jobs that we've identified by this, again, very specific definition of what a good job can be. And so without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Jesse Crete from the Orange County Center of Excellence to share. Thank you.
Real quick, sorry, Dr. Crete, I just have one final comment. So some context here is, this was just incredibly timely that this research is being done. Just so we fully expect that we will, start that conversation and vote for the industries that this group will focus on when we think about catalysts and moving forward at the next meeting at the end of this month. So we just wanted to provide one more data point. If you saw in the regional plan part 1, there was a significant amount of work from the Center of Excellence. So this is now in addition to that. And again, we thought it was very important that we get this one last presentation in with some of those other data sets that will prepare for all of you before we make that decision on how to proceed as a region. So I think with that, I think that sets the stage for Dr. Crete. Please take it away.
Thanks, Jesse. It's always fun being on these meetings with Jesse because we never know who's being discussed when they say our names. I'm Dr. Jesse Crete, as was mentioned. I am the director for the Orange County Center of Excellence, and I am honored to be here today with my colleague, Assistant Director, Mr. Jacob Poor. And as Jesse said, we are going to be talking with you a little bit about industries. The occupational part of our assessment was done earlier and is a part of already part of your draft plan. So we're going to really focus on industries this time. I just want to point out as we get started, as Jacob's pulling up the slides, that the methodology that we used is very, very, very similar for both occupations and industry. So as Victor mentioned, it is a pretty high bar. What Victor and SCAG asked us to do is really look to see what would it take to for those industries and those jobs in Orange County to be sustainable with any kind of economic downturn. So we had to come up with a methodology that would allow us to figure that out. That does not mean these are the only good industries, good jobs. It just means these are the ones that came up to the very, very, very cream of the crop with a very stringent methodology with high criteria. So with that, let's just jump right in. Just super briefly, for anybody that doesn't know, the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Research, we are all throughout the state, and we are funded by the Community College Chancellor System of California. We are specifically as part of the community colleges to provide labor market information for all of the career technical education programs. So obviously, if you're going to come to a community college, you're going to come to one of our CTE programs, we want to make sure that you're going to get a job afterwards. So our faculty and our deans work very closely with us to take a look at current labor market information, to project what's going to be coming out in the future. We look very closely at skills and things associated with different occupations so they can make sure that when they're developing their curriculum, again, that they have the right pieces in there. We work closely with industry. I see many, many familiar faces and names on this webinar today. So yeah, we have our fingers in a lot of different pots, but really predominantly we're providing that labor market information, providing that connection between education and industry and the data. So up on this slide, you'll see two different links. One is straight just to our general statewide website, and one is to the Orange County's COE page. Almost everything we produce is free and accessible to all of you, so you can access it there. SCAG's work is not up there at this moment. We're still finishing up some things with Victor, so but you have access to all these slides. So with that, I know what you really want to hear is the industry and the methodology. So I'm going to hand it right on over to Jacob, and he's going to dive in with you on that. And I will be here. Feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat, and I can answer them while Jacob is presenting.
Perfect. Thank you, Jesse. So yes, I'm going to be talking about our industry assessment. And as Victor and Jesse alluded to, we were looking at a very specific way of trying to figure out which jobs were stable during the last two major economic downturns. That's the Great Recession, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic recession that we recently went through. But the other big part that we wanted to look at was wages, because the cost of living throughout Orange County and Southern California as a whole is so high. So we'll talk a little bit more about the other components that go into these good industries and family supporting industries. But first and foremost, we want to talk about the wages and talk about that a little bit. So to be considered a good industry, something had to be, an industry had to be stable during those two periods that we talked about. And they had to have average earnings at or above the living wage as defined by the MIT living wage of $23.66 an hour for single adults. So that's much higher than what we see when we're talking about things like minimum wage. And a big driver of that is just the cost of living in Orange County, how much it costs to rent, how much it costs for health insurance. Everything that goes into that is basic necessities. It's nothing that includes like vacations or trips to Disneyland or anything like that. It just covers your basic necessities. And that living wage is actually the highest of all of the SCAG regions in Southern California. We also wanted to look at not only if you were able to sustain yourself as a single adult, but if you wanted to also support a family. We looked at some census data and found that the average household size in Orange County is 2 adults and 1 child. So according to the MIT living wage, both adults would have to be making $25.57 an hour in order to support a family. So again, I just want to emphasize that's 2 working adults, and that's why the figures aren't so high, because you have 2 contributors to the family income. So we took a look at nearly 1,000 detailed industries in Orange County, looked at what was stable during the Great Recession as well as the COVID-19 pandemic recession, and we found the overlap between those, and were able to identify only 14 recession-stable industries in Orange County. These are detailed industries rather than some of the broader industries you might have seen in the initial report and the analysis done by Dr. Robert Kleinhans. And again, I just want to emphasize what Jesse said, is this is the cream of the crop of the industries. This is not necessarily that other industries are bad. It's just that these are met the criteria that we have for these periods that you'll see on the next couple of slides. So with that, let's take a look at the 14 industries themselves. I want to just very quickly talk about what each of these columns is, just so you have some reference as we're looking at these slides. The first 2 columns are those industry definitions as defined by the federal government. So they are sometimes technical in the way that they are defined. So electrical contractors and other wiring installation contractors, that's pretty straightforward to understand. But if there's anything that looks a little odd, I'll try to point it out to what that is. But you can also go ahead and even Google these, and you'll be able to find information on businesses that fall into each of them. The next 4 columns are pretty straightforward. It's just telling you the number of jobs in these years, as well as the change between these years as a number and a percentage. Here we have those average hourly earnings. These 2 columns, I'll start with establishments. This basically says the number of actual physical locations of businesses within that industry, whereas location quotient, it's a little bit technical, but the short version of it is it shows the employment concentration of that industry in Orange County. Anything that's above a 1 means that there's a relatively higher concentration of employment in that industry, and we'll see some examples of really high location quotients later. Anything below means that there's a relatively lower concentration of employment in Orange County relative to the nation. So if you look down here, this is like a medical device manufacturing industry that was considered stable. It has a really high location quotient because we have a relatively large share of employment here in Orange County, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone. And then you'll see throughout here, for example, elementary and secondary schools, it's highlighted in its gray because it met that good industry definition, but did not meet that family supporting definition because these average wages were below that wage. So let's take a look at the rest of the recession stable industries. What we've seen in here a lot is there was some education, there were some professional services, some social services like child and youth services, Again, here's educational support services, and tax prep services is an example of some sort of professional services, tax offices, things of that nature. So with that, we'll look a little more in detail at the methodology we used. I'm not going to read the numbers off to you because no one wants to have numbers read off to them first thing in the morning on a Friday morning. So again, we were trying to find those jobs that thrived during the Great Recession and then also contributed to the economic recovery following the Great Recession. We found 65, so there were more in this case than the overall stable. We also wanted to make sure that there was a significant number of jobs in these industries. If something grew like 500%, but that was a change from 10 to 50 jobs, it's not something that is significant and does not provide a significant number of jobs to the county. So we just wanted to make sure that these industries also had a large number of jobs, or significant number of jobs, I should say. And then again, the wages, which I've talked about several times now, we wanted to make sure these industries had those hourly earnings above the MIT living wage. So let's take a look at a couple. Right off the bat, at the top, we see amusement and theme parks. This is, again, one of those big location quotient industries, something that's really important to the Orange County economy, something that's very unique. We have multiple amusement parks here between Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. These were stable during the Great Recession. And you can see not a lot of establishments because there, again, are only a handful of amusement and theme park locations, but really high location quotient. But again, it does not meet that family supporting industry. So even though there are lots of jobs, even though it was stable during the Great Recession, the wages are still coming below that family supporting wage. Similarly, warehouse clubs and super centers down here, those are things like your Costco and Sam's Club. Same idea, did not meet that family supporting industry. So we're not going to have time to go over each and every single one of these in detail, but I'm going to scroll through so you can take a quick look at them. You'll see throughout the presentation, the industries that are denoted with the asterisk are those that were overall resilient, or excuse me, overall stable, that we saw on the first group of 14. So that's what that asterisk indicates. Another example we have here is assisted living facilities for the elderly. Again, stable, big employment base, grew a lot during the Great Recession and following the Great Recession, but wages are below that family supporting wage that we're looking at. On the flip side, you have something like dental laboratories where we have very high location quotient with a lot of dental labs, really big employment there relative to the rest of the nation, and wages are really high, average hourly earnings of $38. And so you'll see it has these two check boxes marked. Okay, we have a couple more of these. Gonna go ahead and scroll through them so we can get to the last things. A couple of different retail types of stores came up on here as well. So you have things like men's clothing stores. There was a woman and child's clothes manufacturing somewhere else. So this gives you a good idea of what was stable during that Great Recession. And finally, we're going to go and take a look at the COVID-19 pandemic recession. This is something that we all just experienced together and went through. In this case, we found 74 COVID-19 pandemic recession stable industries. We're looking at essentially the same criteria. We're just changing the years to take into account that 2019 to 2020 period where jobs just fell off of a cliff due to all of the health precautions that were taken and several businesses being forced to close their doors. And then the immediate post-recession period, which is really short because we saw that big recovery in employment. Same thing on the number of jobs. We just wanted to make sure there was a sizable employment base. And then finally, again, with the wages. But interestingly, you're going to see some differences here. So we talked about amusement and theme parks earlier as being stable during the Great Recession, definitely not stable during the COVID-19 pandemic recession. I think for a lot of us, when the theme parks started closing, that was the real big moment where we went, oh, this is going to be a lot different than anything we've experienced before. I know I felt that way at least. But you'll see some other things that we heard throughout the pandemic that were thriving in some ways, like offices of real estate agents and brokers. Real estate, and it's important to the Orange County economy, comes through a lot here, especially in recent years. You have real estate credit, There's some on the following pages as well too. And again, you'll see those ones with the asterisk that come in and are stable during both this recession, COVID-19, and also the previous Great Recession. Again, we're seeing a lot of different types of real estate sorts of things. So mortgage and non-mortgage loan brokers, also a pretty high location quotient. Medical, dental, and hospital equipment and supplies merchant wholesalers. We needed to get supplies to the hospitals in an efficient manner to be able to combat the pandemic. So that was stable during that time. Other building material dealers, again, going back to that kind of real estate and construction sort of synergy there. Optometrist, industrial design services. So you see that there is a lot of a different mix of the industries that were stable during the COVID-19 pandemic that were not stable during the Great Recession and vice versa. And that's why we wanted to look at the overlap to see which of those industries were stable during both periods in that first list, because the economic downturns were just so different from each other and the characteristics of them were also extremely different. Go to the next slide. There's 74 in here, so I'm not going to have time to go through all of them, but we'll keep going. Something on the next page, I believe, is household appliances and merchant wholesalers. Again, that was something that was stable overall, and again during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this case, there was this one industry here that was stable during the pandemic: nursery, garden center, and farm supply stores. Everyone was inside. Everyone wanted to go do some gardening, wanted to get outside somehow. So stable during the pandemic, but relatively small location quotient. So not a big, lots of employment in here compared to some other places throughout the country. And again, it does not meet that family supporting wage, but it's also not too far off. So something to keep in mind as you're looking at these is keep in mind these living wages that we have over here, because there are some that, barely missed the mark or also maybe barely got above the mark as well too. So with that concludes our stable industries presentation. Dr. Creed, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Sorry, Jacob, I've been frantically answering questions in the chat.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad people are interested.
Yeah, so I got to one of the last one I didn't get was there's two now, but one's Tiffany, what's included in the child and youth services industry, and then I apologize, it's cutting off your name. I'm assuming that's probably Jasmine. In the underlying data, do you have a list of the specific establishments for each NAICS?
So I'll take the latter one for now, is the list of the specific establishments. So the establishments that you see here, that's all data that's reported to the federal government, to the Employment Development Department, and then reported to the federal government. So these are the number of establishments that businesses report. We do not have a list of the specific establishments that go into that, though, for purposes of privacy and protection, so that businesses are not revealing all of their potential secrets or trade secrets or things like that. So while we don't have a specific list, you can get a general sense of what falls into them. And oftentimes, you can look on the Census Bureau website, for example, where they have definitions of NAICS codes. There's also a NAICS association where you can enter information, and they'll usually have examples of large employers in those industries. And Jesse just put that information in the chat, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I agree, David. It would be good. I think Karen was commenting to know specifically which companies are the ones who provide those high wages. We don't get that when we look at industry-specific information like this. We'd have to look at it a little bit differently. This was more just to kind of give us a broader look. But I think one of the conversations you're all going to have is when you identify which industries are the ones that you want to focus on, then that's where you would dive down into going into what are the specific companies, what are the wages. So this is just to give you a high-level look to start that conversation, to help you identify where you should prioritize what you're going to be working on. So that's what SCAG asked us to do. As Victor said in the very beginning, it was to get the conversation going and to give you some data to say, here's the cream of the crop are there things here we want to pull first and then go from there? So I agree, this report was never intended to kind of be an end all be all. It was just to get the conversation going. And based off all the questions, I think it's doing that. So we're very happy to answer any other questions. Jesse, I don't remember if you also gave them the occupations, if they wanted to see that as well, but we're happy to put that deck in if you'd like that. And Linda's got a question, and it looks like we've got one in the chat too.
I would say feel free to drop whatever. Again, I think we included everything, and they also have the previous reports you did that you spoke to us about, maybe back in like March or so. So they have that, but of course, if you want to, it's been
I'll throw the occupation one in as well.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will just say, when you look at whenever we develop PowerPoints, Jacob and I are pretty intentional about putting quite a few notes in there for you, because we don't want you to be worried about taking a bunch of notes yourself during this. We want you to be able to come back and see that access. And obviously you have access to our emails. However, Jesse and Victor want you to handle that, but we're fine with communication coming directly at us. Linda?
Thank you, Jesse. We tend to think when we talk about, the industry sectors or industries, we tend to think of them in terms of different definitions. For example, when we say like life sciences or medical device or digital health or healthcare. So when I look at the granular approach of these lists, has there been any next stage clustering? In other words, these are the components of medical device, or this is what we would refer to as medical device?
Great question, Linda. So we didn't do that deep of a dive in the industry exactly, but we did in occupations. So I just put our full and complete occupation deck in there. I believe the deck that Jesse had access to originally and gave to you back in May did not have our career cluster work. That was work that we added on later. We were trying to get Jesse and Dr. Wallace-Warrod and everybody the basic occupation analysis, they could put it into the plan. So we had to go back and add some career cluster information, which is exactly what you're talking about. We took all, I believe it's 72 stable jobs for Orange County, and we divided them into career clusters. It's not exactly an industry straight thing, but it's very similar to exactly what you're talking about. You can go in, you can see it on the slides. We have it as a cumulative assessment in one slide, and then multiple slides afterwards that break it down after that. So I just put that in the chat for you. Tony?
Thank you, ma'am.
You are very welcome.
So it looks like, but you're obviously you're looking only at occupations, and you're using that as a proxy for industry. So this particular analysis doesn't include non-employer firms at all?
No, our occupation and our industry analysis were two separate analyses. So I was just referring to the granular level career that Linda was just asking for. This industry is looking at NAICS codes and industry specifically. It's not translating that back to occupations.
Okay, but if you're only looking at employment wages, I guess what I can't tell, because of course I don't know what exact databases you're using, so it'd be really helpful if we could be provided with that, and it's probably in a report. It looks like you said you gave us the report. When you're looking at number of employees, when you're looking at your 3 criteria that you're using, for instance, you are evaluating changes in the number of employees. Some of the EDD data does not differentiate between part-time and full-time. And we would expect in the recession, and we certainly saw it sometimes during the pandemic, that what happened was there was a shift in full-time to part-time, but we can't tell that from the database. I guess, the work on occupations was, I thought, very good. I don't know enough about your actual structure of this research to feel comfortable that it accurately presents something called cream of the crop industries. I understand that high wages and being able to meet family means are absolutely fundamental concepts, but I don't really know that I would say that was for that was the only thing we should be looking at when we said what were going to be the priority industries for the HRTC's regional plan. So maybe I just don't know enough about how you did all of your work, and I would just feel more comfortable if I could see that. When it was described here, you said small businesses weren't very important because there weren't many businesses within certain categories. But I mean, if you want to have manufacturing, we know that the supply chain is substantially comprised of specialized small businesses. So again, maybe you've incorporated all of this and I just am not, you're giving a very high level, you're trying to do it very quickly. I'm just not seeing that. So to me, I'm understanding, how do small businesses fit in? How do non-employer firms, which make up the majority of firms in Orange County, as well as the rest of the state, I would be happy to do a sidebar conversation, maybe to have a more understanding of the work. But I just was left with a lot of questions.
I appreciate your questions, Tony, and I get what you're saying. We're happy to have those conversations with you. That's not a problem. You are correct in that this is a pretty quick, succinct presentation that we're trying to put together. It's actually one of the reasons why I recommended taking a look at the notes section in our slides. The product of this particular project was a slide deck. We also did put this in a Word document, that PDF, because it was a little easier to read. But we do go through and talk about our methodologies. And when I talk about cream of the crop, what I'm specifically referring to is, we looked at what were the industries that thrived during those two economic downturns, and then applied that criteria moving forward. So what we tried to do was isolate what were the parameters of those industries. We're not saying these are the only good ones. We're not saying these are anything else. We are saying these are the ones that we are predicting to thrive moving forward. And we did that with quite a bit of confidence, in that we did this analysis for our own colleges back in 2020. And then we were able to go back this year. We published our own report prior to SCAG. It's using the California Insight numbers instead of MIT. It's called our Resilient Jobs Report that we published. It's on our website. And we were able to go back and validate our original methodology from 3 years ago to see if those predictions at that point panned out, and they did. So again, like I said, I feel pretty confident in what we did, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you after that. I want to let Jacob just really briefly answer the other couple questions you had about small business and some of the other things.
Yeah, so I'll just add on top of that, it's not that small businesses are excluded. The small businesses would all get rolled up into these industry codes to represent a industry. So I think I see where you were coming from, because we were talking about those industries that had like a sizable employment base, for example. And once you add up all of those small businesses, we would add up all of those numbers of employees that represent those small businesses, for example. On the point about non-employer and the data source. So the data source that we use is called Lightcast. It's a labor market analytics firm. And part of what they do is they do take the official government data, but they also combine different governmental data sets to provide estimates of things like non-employment statistics as well too. So folks who are self-employed, for example, are included in these estimates from Lightcast. So I just wanted to add that as well too.
And before we get to the questions, Tony brought it up, and I think Anna, you're kind of referring this as well. So I would say that, these are data sets, and I think the idea of, when we think about industry cluster selection, it doesn't necessarily mean we take the quote unquote strongest, particularly when it comes to catalysts. Tony, like you mentioned, some industries may be better suited for pre-development than others. Or it could be the idea of, as you're mentioning, well, which ones were the least resilient, and what can we do through SURF to make them more resilient? So this is, and this is right, this is a presentation more toward the industries of, it's like, I guess, like the ones when you think about the quote unquote good industries that we can maybe make more equitable, or that could help drive environmental sustainability. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of our industries have to be the ones highlighted here, and that we can absolutely probably pick one towards the ones that I guess are seen as less resilient and less stable, as a way to make them more resilient and more stable.
Well, I guess what I would,
if you have more to that.
I guess what I would suggest is that we look at the titles, then how we're describing things. I'm sure that there data approach is accurate and represents something. But the verbiage, the narrative of it, cream of the crop, best industries ever, I think we need to be really clear about what's being measured and what it is, so that when we go back, because we're not going to remember this particular conversation except in very general terms, say in a month, or maybe I'm just too old, but so that we're understanding this is a great look at and what it is that we're really seeing, so that we can fit things together to come up with priorities. I would hate for us to say, well, we chose an industry sector that wasn't the cream of the crop, but we felt we had to. I mean, we need to be more specific.
Yeah, I would just add that I believe Dr. Kleinhans, he was looking specifically at the industries that had those economic downturns. And I believe that is part of your draft report, because we did a report similar with Dr. Kleinhans like years ago during COVID as well. So I think the idea was to kind of get two different lenses of the industries and the work.
Could I say something about downturn? Because I think there too, this is Austin from Unite here. I mean, there's some very important information that needs to be understood. For instance, when the downturn hit, right, the theme parks were closed, but the workers at Disneyland were wall-to-wall union. They had their health care covered the entire time they were out. They had their seniority guaranteed the entire time. Some of them was for 6 months, some of them was for a year. They came back without missing a beat. Knott's Berry Farm workers were out of luck. They're non-union. They didn't get squat. They all lost their jobs and had to scramble to find somewhere else. But that's the big difference between high road and low road, and the type of thing that's not captured in this information, that there's a huge difference between, your theme park is shut down because of a pandemic, but your job is secure and you can go to the doctor the entire time. And so there is, and, like it or not, governments are rushing to create more jobs in the theme park sector, whether they ought to or not, they are. And those jobs can be, really good or really bad. You could, as a housekeeper, you can be making $25 at Disney, or you can be making $15.50 at a non-union hotel. That's a life-changing difference, and surf could make the difference. I speak out of my own industry. I'm sure there are examples in other areas, but I just see, like, when not to pick on security services, but I see that listed as $51 an hour. I would be willing to bet that security guards are not making $51 an hour. And so I certainly would, I think this analysis is valuable, but I agree that I wouldn't want to, put this as a sole base, or feel hemmed in that alone, that comparison, obliges us to pick people who rank higher in this criteria without looking at a fuller picture.
Well, and then also just at that point, I will say, right, there is all the other research being done, of which, of course, one is Dr. Parks, and this is just one that came up recently, which is why it wasn't presented much earlier. So I could say, like, this is not, I would say, the deck necessarily that we are going to make all these decisions off of, but there are those others that do industry wage analysis as well in our regional plan part 1, which, of course, again, and as is Dr. Parks's research as well. So this is just one of multiple data sets that you can look at, refer to, and digest for us to make the most informed decision.
Thank you.
And then your points are very well taken, right? As you think about providing more context behind some of these numbers.
It looks like we have a couple more questions. I do just want to kind of let you all know, we actually got double booked. We had another presentation when Jesse asked us to come and do this. So we are going to have to run in just a couple of minutes, because that one's in person. So just know that if it sounds like we're rushing, we kind of are. Melanie?
Yeah, I'll be brief then. I just want to comment, Jesse's comment kind of hit it on the head of what I was going to say, that it may be that we need to focus on stabilizing other industries, but I also want to point out that some of the industries, like the one I'm in, aren't actually listed in here. And so we need to make sure that we're actually capturing the suite of industries that cover the HRTC, whether it's CBOs or tribes or nonprofits, because those are a key driver within this program. And so I'm struggling because if this is what we're going to use to pick industries, we're already leaving industry types out. And then I would also submit, maybe I work with you, Jesse, on this. There's a nonprofit compensation study specific to Southern California that I think can provide some interesting data that aligns with some of the information we've seen today. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we love to look at that. And then again, this is where we are still in the draft phase of the research or the regional plan part 1, and we could think about some incorporation.
And I just would agree with everything everybody said. This deck was never meant to be the end all be all. It's meant to be a piece. So please do not think we think that, we understand it's looking at a very specific thing. It's a very narrow parameters. It's just one piece of many that should be addressed when you're looking at these. I did want to address a couple comments in the chat. I believe it was Donna that asked, how do these job sectors relate to current vocational training programs available at OC community colleges? In the occupation deck that we attached, we also did, no, that's not true. I'm going to attach another deck, that's an educational pathways deck. I forgot that was a separate slide deck. And what we do in that is we show all of the educational, we took the top 25 stable jobs. This is occupation, not industry. But we then walked and mentioned similar job titles, similar kind of SOC codes. We provide a little more information, but then we list the community colleges and the non-community colleges, so 4 years, privates, et cetera, that train for those programs. So that's what SCAG asked us to do, kind of a concentrated look on that. So that's what we did. So I'll put that in the deck for you. So that will answer part of that question. It's a subset of all of this work. I think the other questions I'm seeing in the chat, we either answered or predominantly comments to what's already been said. Is there anything else we can do for you all before we race over to Santa Ana College?
I think we're good. And I mean, your contact information is in the deck, but if anyone wants to reach out to me to coordinate, I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you so much.
You are very welcome. And not to put Victor on the hot seat, but Victor is going to stay here with you for the rest of the meeting. So if other questions come up, Victor probably could do this work in his sleep, just like, he's had to do this so much with us over Southern California. So we're happy, he can definitely answer on our behalf, and you can reach out to us anytime. So thank you all. Have a great Friday and rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Jacob.
Okay. So in a tiny bit, we'll move into seeing if the group wants to make a motion to approve the analysis as an appendix in the regional report part 1. But before we do that, I just want to make a quick note about voting. I know it feels like we're taking votes on a lot of things, and sometimes it feels like it's rushed. Just want to emphasize that we will follow up afterwards. Don't feel like this is when you make a decision and that's it. We will follow up. Para los que hablan español, en un momento vamos a ver si vamos a tomar un voto si añadimos al reporte, pero no sientan presión de que se tiene que tomar una decisión ahorita. Vamos a platicar después y pueden compartir su voto en otro momento. Esto es nomás para que el grupo pueda empezar a pensar si vamos a querer añadir esto al reporte. With that said, I welcome comments in terms of if this is something that the group wants to move forward as a motion to approve to the regional report. Any community residents also who want to make a comment? ¿Algún residente que quiera hacer un comentario? Gary, I see your hand up. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. This issue is just kind of indicative of, I think, some of the frustration that I feel, and I'm assuming many others do, is that what we're being asked to approve is important. It's going to have a bearing on the alignment of strategies with this and funding going forward. And, the frustration comes from, we've had 15 minutes to look at it and digest it and now vote on it. And, I just think there's a lot of loose ends that has been brought up in this. And I'm not against it because, quite frankly, it's so quick. I don't know if I'm for it or against it, but I think I'm for it. But at the same time, it just seems like there's a lot of loose ends. More information needs to be done, and we need more time to actually try to digest and process what this means, and have a more meaningful Q&A. And so, I'm just suggesting that we take a really good look at how we're approving very important items going forward, and how we're really understanding what we're approving. So,
yeah, point well taken. I just will say that these the decks are provided to you a week in advance, and that if people would essentially, like, on one hand, you're saying, well, we need more time to consume the information, but then you want more time for question and answer. So what we could do again is the information provided. Right. They don't present. They're just available for Q&A discussion. Or we assume that some people may not read it thoroughly and want more context. And then therefore, that's why you have a presentation with some time for Q&A. There's definitely a balance, but it's almost, on one hand, all the information is presented. We cannot have a presentation, just be Q&A, so we have ample time to do those things. Or it's like, it's what we are doing, which is giving you information, trying to present some highlights, and then allowing for Q&A discussion. Another thing I will say is, like, and by all means, Gary, like you kind of bring it up, like, this is for the group. If you don't motion in a second, I mean, we don't move forward with it. Or the motion could be, we want this to be brought up at another meeting. Again, we're happy to format it. Originally, the plan was very little presentation, just time for Q&A. However, I'd say it was kind of somewhat clear early on, just because it's a big group, and I know some of you are reading, some of you aren't, that people would be say overwhelmed by the information and not being able to like have a productive conversation. So we went with the more of a hybrid of, there is some presentation here with time for Q&A. But again, this is obviously the format will be we will do a format that's most useful to the group. But I think you can understand the trade-off. So then there's a far greater expectation that all the materials get read before we meet. And so long as people can agree to that, then we can proceed more with a just Q&A and just discussion type of format.
No, Jesse, I appreciate your leadership on this. I think I did look at it when I first got the packet. And again, it's a lot of issues that I, for one, don't work with much. And so, I anxiously, after I read it, I said, well, we certainly need a presentation on this, basically just to further explain it. So I'm glad that you did that, but it's a lot of information condensed in an extremely short period of time. And by the questions today, there's kind of a lot of loose ends. I just feel uncomfortable now on basically voting up or down on it.
But that's totally fair. Hence why I think it's right that the practice is that you approve before it goes in the material, and not just it unilaterally being done. So if there's more confusion, more questions to be answered, that could be the recommendation, and we welcome that. Sorry, Linda.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. This is we've talked about this right from the beginning of this exercise and this project, which is the quantity of information that's being directed to our attention. It is, quite frankly, just being like hit with a tsunami. Those of us that are more familiar with its format or methodologies might feel a little more comfortable with it. But I've expressed to you, Jesse, that sometimes I just feel like my head is exploding. So I have great empathy for what's being expressed. I also know, however, that I would not want this data to be misconstrued other than that it's to inform us. It's just to inform us. It's just every piece of data that we've been given is just to give us one more piece to the puzzle. And then how we interpret that and how our organizations individually translate that as being purposeful in how we approach our role, that's where the bottom line is. So how Gary is going to interpret it and look at that information and translate it for his purposes is probably going to be a little different than how I would approach it for our organization and our purposes. But we've got to agree on accepting the sets of data for the purposes of informing us. Not that it will have all the solutions, nor will it answer all the questions, but rather that it informs us within the context of all the data that we've received, and that's our responsibility.
Yeah, I would just add, I appreciate that kind of the way you just described that, Lyndon. Certainly from the perspective of, you know, in SCAG and completing this work, that's, you know, we're working on this particular study, and you know, we share it with the intention of, you know, if this is helpful to inform the conversation within the HRTC, and we're doing the same thing across the other 4 SURF regions that we're involved in, and you know, and it's you know, intended to be something useful and informative. And on the flip side, just as I mentioned, you know, where I think, you know, the work we're doing at SCAG, that's SCAG driven, not SURF driven, very closely aligns with this. And so the comments that some of you are making are exactly what we have in mind in terms of as we go and develop our report. So SCAG is developing this report, you know, across the region, and then the SURFs are doing their own reports. Our intention is for ultimately the plan that you all develop as part of the HRTC is going to inform our work. You know, we don't want those two things to be isolated and different. So you know, we share this research with the intention of informing if it's useful. You know, that's for you all to decide. You know, as part of the HRTC, and then certainly from my perspective, the work that the HRTC is doing will inform the work that we're doing at SCAG.
Tony?
So I certainly like to have more data than less data, and you often can't tell how data fits together until you can see all the different sets. I guess if I feel a little uncomfortable today in voting for this, I did review this ahead of time and had I saved you from the entire page of notes that I actually had. But I think maybe instead of talking with the researchers, maybe we can talk a little bit about how we might include it within our report. For part 1, that we might specifically have a category as we get down closer and closer to specific strategies. The stakes of the information become more important, and that's why this is a particular study to try to come up with pulling things together. So maybe there's a section that says this is one of a set, or in this section of the report are different glimpses at or looks at, I'm sure there's a better research title, and that we're not in any way indicating that this is true or accurate. The titles in this is like, this is a recession resistant industry sector. That's a very big statement. And I don't know that I would be in the place to know whether I think that's true or not. I think this is an accurate statement of what these respected researchers that are peer reviewed and all of that, this is their take at that. But when we put it in our report, we're essentially validating that it's there, unless we say something else. And as I said, I have total respect for these guys. I just don't think that we have all the different pieces. So let's be sure we're representing it in that way.
And we'll have a final comment, and then we'll move. And y'all don't want to make a motion, and during this call, that's, you don't have to do it. Cesar.
Thank you. Just following up on these comments, I think it's also important for us to consider comments that we heard here today and have heard in other conversations in terms of seeing the data, but also ground truthing it and understanding the realities in the communities and in those job sectors. I think we need a little bit more information also from that perspective. And I know it's a challenge to get that data, but we have been hearing some of that from some of our participants here on the call today and then other calls. The other part that is also interesting, at least for the second part in terms of the COVID pandemic, is I don't know if it's available, but if there's an opportunity to also to understand to what extent there was a lot of heavy COVID funding support from the government to those sectors to really make them more resistant than other areas. So those are just some comments that I think we also need to consider as a whole. And I like the idea that when we're talking about this data and we're trying to put it into the appendices of the overall research, there is some validation that goes into that. I think that there's some assumptions that we're considering that this data, by and large, will be used for us to make decisions. And I'd like to make sure that the data is more complete and we're considering also other alternatives that we may not be presented with. And how we're capturing, the thoughts that folks are bringing forth in these conversations on this data, how we're capturing that to be part of the appendices too.
Okay. Very good. So it sounds like for this specific item, we won't have a motion to, and we'll get more take in all your comments and come back to this item at a later time. Does that sound like the right next step? Okay, perfect. And I'll just say something very quickly. I shared this example with Jesse. I know sometimes these, feels rushed, but it's like a little bit of fire in the forest warms up your coffee. Too much fire burns down the forest. So we try to give you enough fire, so to get your reactions, to get us moving. We're a big group, but we don't want to burn down the forest, So we'll continue to work with you to make sure that we have the right information. With this said, let's turn it to the next item in the agenda, which is the community response to industries that support high quality jobs. Pass it over to Jesse.
Yeah, so this was pretty much the outreach and engagement initiative has been completed by the 27 organizations that did this work. A full analysis of kind of all the questions and surveys will be brought to you in a subsequent meeting, I think at the meeting at the end of the month. But because, again, we are working towards the conversation around potential industries to pick, we wanted to make sure that we presented you this information. We will follow, so the narrative was already in the agenda packet. We will obviously share the slide deck. But as mentioned, maybe somewhat previously, is like, this is not comprehensive of all the industries in Orange County because it was focused on kind of the better paying or the higher quality ones. And then again, that is not to say that these are the only industries to pick from, because this is what was solicited from the community, because there is an approach of, with the industries we end up selecting as a region, how many of them are these, high quality, well-paying industries that we want to, again, make more economic, make more inclusive, versus the other category could be, there are industries that are, again, less resilient or pay less well on the whole. How do we make them better? So I just want to say that even this survey is very narrow. It's tricky just because if you think about a survey with residents, we can't dump all this data on them. They won't fill out the survey. We can't when we say nuance the questions, there were other questions we had to ask. And so, even some of the feedback when it was drafted and sent to all the partners who were disseminating it about the length of it. So we did a lot to try to narrow this down. So I would just say, this is, I think, again, going to be a helpful data point. As all this, it is not the only data point. So I want to preface that as CJ kind of walks through what the results are. So CJ, I think you have access. And you're on mute.
Yeah, Jesse, he can't pull up the slides on his phone. Can we pull them up? Sorry. Yeah, unfortunately, CJ's having issues logging in.
Jesse, you're muted.
I'll say, Dr. Ardo-Sarah, if you have access to the deck, just because my email's still loading, you could go ahead and share a screen and have CJ walk through it.
Let me try.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Here we go.
And then perfect. Sorry, I'm at a in mentorship appreciation lunch and a breakfast, and the Wi-Fi is not as accessible as they thought it would be. So to kick this off, so the question that we asked for the community is, what industries do you think are most important to support / grow in Orange County in order to provide high quality future jobs for the community? So this was reached out to just under 3,000 or so participants. And what we're doing is we're going to provide a breakdown of who the participants are and how that they responded. So if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so thank you. So overall, what we're looking at is with the respondents, these are the different organizations they participated in and who responded. So VietRise had about 19.4, so just under 20% of the responses. BPSOS at 11.79%, and then Latino Health at 10.34, followed by California Forward, with the rest of the organizations shown there as representing the latter parts of who respond to this particular question. Next slide, please. So for this slide, this is the overall approach of what they said that they respond to was most important with the selections available, with the majority at just under 23% being healthcare, at 18.10 being education, and then computer and information technology, 11.82, rounding out the top three. Legal was just under 11%, and the rest were under 10% regarding the importance of those. Next slide, please. Now, we also want to provide framing of who responded from a demographic perspective, and then how those responses fell across those different categories of options of importance of high quality industries that they felt were important. So with these respondents, the largest representation was Asian or Asian American at 53%, 32% Hispanic Latino, white at 9%, 2% at Middle Eastern or North American, or at North African, excuse me, with other biracial, prefer not to state in Black American at below the 2% threshold. So we go to the next slide, we can see how they responded to these in category types. So at the very top, we have overall. So the numbers that we saw on the first slide as far as healthcare being the most important, 22.64. Then in order of representation, who was there the most, who the largest respondents representation of this, we see the remaining demographic populations for race and ethnicity that was selected. So we can see that across the board, health was pretty important, especially for those at the highest level, followed by education, and then followed by computer science technology. So this is just a visual representation, and we can provide, again, a sample that has a much more broad perspective, but provide you an understanding of where it all fell, with really those top three, healthcare, education, and computer information technology, providing the biggest representation, the most importance to these different demographic groups. Next slide, please. Identified gender, it was very heavily represented with females at 63%, 34% male, and then below the 1% or lower threshold was the non-binary, other, prefer not to state, or transgender populations. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see how they also responded related to this. So again, similar to the other one, the overall is the very top with the largest represented populations from top to lowest being presented there. We're seeing, again, that, with this being such a not really too diverse of a population, as far as selection options, we're seeing it pretty much aligned with the top three, with just under half for healthcare, education, and computer information science technology. And we just have two more groups to go through to see the representation. We go to the next slide, please. We see the response based on age group. So here, our largest representation is ages 65 and older at 20%, followed by 55-64. Then we get to 25-34 at 16%. So that's our first half, is within those three demographic populations, followed by 45-54, 35-44, 18-24, and the lowest at below 10% at under 18. If you go to the next slide, please. Within that, we can, again, similar models before. We're seeing a little bit more of a representation of these, the demographics that are more senior that we're seeing that with healthcare being a very much an important aspect of it. But across the board, we're really seeing similar traits with the others, with legal really kind of popping out as a higher representation, legal and life and physical social sciences compared to other category types, as those mostly are 10% or greater across the categories, with the other categories being below 10% of importance. And then the last one where I'm going to spend a little bit more time along space for, if you don't mind, on the next slide, is really the response household income. So just to get an idea of really who the community is from a financial perspective, we're looking at under 25,000, representing 30% of our population, with prefer not to state at 26%. And then we go to 25 to 50,000 at 19. 50 to 75,000, 11%, and then under 10, we have over 175 and 100,000. And then the last slide, this shows the representation regarding those groups. So we still have, again, with order of representation from highest to lowest, we have the under 25,000 showing the predominant desire for healthcare compared to other categories across how we previously examined, really wanting healthcare to be represented. But similar to the other ones, we have healthcare, education, and legal. Legal showing the most kind of out of place with not need of those over 100,000, but still we're seeing that predominant order of importance falls into healthcare, education, computer science, and then legal and life science and social science. So that is the breakdown by these groups. This representation is really meant for more of a visual perspective and conversation. We will provide documentation that allow you to look a little bit more granular for these particular data sets, but we wanted to provide an understanding of what the communities are who are part of this survey and really where they stand based on different demographic facets. And as Jesse said, we have a much more robust report that's going to be coming at the end of the month. This is just a sample associated with this specific question.
Thanks, CJ.
Of course.
Any questions or comments? Again, this deck will be downloaded into the shared folder that you all use, but we got the narrative because that was done, and then CJ worked on the PowerPoint deck earlier on in the week, so it was past the deadline where I want to send things out, as much as I can a week ahead of time. Any questions or comments on what you saw there?
Jesse, just a real quick one. What was the raw number of surveys completed? I think I missed that.
Sarah, you have that number. Or CJ. Yeah, Sarah, CJ.
Yeah, sorry. So the beginning of this, this particular question with this particular group was just under 3,000. It was at 2,857. We'll send that out with the group, but that was the overall population. And then each person was allowed to vote multiple times. So there was something over 8,000 responses as it collectively categorized for each of these groups. So someone may have, and most likely did, in order of importance, answer more than one of these.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Other questions or comments?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to make a comment. Just also, good morning, this is Anna Ursula. Just also that I saw in the chat, Sarah mentioned that there will be full findings in a following meeting to incorporate other data that came in. And then part of what we're submitting is also information from community forums, which I think provide like a different experience with the information, where there's dialogue and there's digestion and there's discussion, rather than like a straightforward survey. So I think we'll be able to see hopefully more detail as well.
Yeah, and that'd be like just like your first section, right? Your participatory action research, right? That's like in the regional plan itself. So we welcome that as another opportunity to provide more context versus a survey. But I think right, there's challenges with that being the only method about kind of the quantity there. So we welcome that. We'll include that even in kind of your previous comment about kind of bundling everything together. So like your findings through in that form will be bundled just as much. So we welcome that input. I think it'll provide context to some of these numbers. CJ, do you have anything to add?
No, I think one thing that we also want to do is we will be sharing out and providing feedback from the organizations themselves too. So to that point, I clearly agree as far as this getting context and then providing additional community and organizational outreach to provide us insight of what they're seeing, because they're the ones who are most connected with these populations of people.
Great. Well, thank you, CJ, for that presentation. We'll be moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the process and letter to consider supporting non-SURF related projects. I'll pass it over to Jesse for that.
Jesse, you're muted.
Jesse.
And I would say that, we have the other presenters. One of the topics that was brought up was to have the consultants about who might help us develop a theory of change. They're going to come on in a few minutes. So, I mean, we'll cover what we can here. I just don't think any action will be taken on this item. But if someone can see them, and I'll try to add them as a panelist. So briefly in the agenda packet, I know it's loading, you'll see kind of two things here. You'll see just a slide about, a draft process. Again, this is why this is a draft. This is, if there are edits, please let me know, per some of the feedback that Tony provided, as well as you see, there's a draft letter, which of course, as I toggle over, can be edited as well. So I think just for now, we'll just probably go over the process until the other panelists come on. So here is, again, a baseline process about how we might want to consider this. And so I think the items, I think, although all of it is up for editing, I think the items in red are probably the ones that I really wanted to highlight. I think, Tony, you brought up the comment about it being non-competitive. I just wanted to confirm that that was the same sentiment, because I guess I get, I guess it's a question of, and why I put that in red, it's a question of, if there was only supposed to be one project funded in Orange County. Tony, you might be more familiar with the funding grant, but if it was a transportation related project and one was in Santa Ana and one was in Fullerton, if the state wasn't going to necessarily only pick one in the region, I guess I was curious as to why we might want that criteria of only one project per region in the grant. That's why it's highlighted in red. Obviously, sharing the information as was requested. I said I put a 2-page summary. I'm wondering if people generally want more information about the project without being kind of overwhelmed by it. You'll see that there. We obviously want to see the budget if we want to feel comfortable signing off on this project. Tony, you mentioned, again, allowing a window in which people can have there's some sort of office hours or your ability to kind of communicate or to exchange ideas or ask questions. So that's what you see in the process on item number 4. Item number 5 is just ensuring that there's, again, enough information is brought to the full HRTC if they don't want to take up these, if they don't want to utilize the calls, and then that way you can kind of review all the materials before you would hypothetically approve. And because there were questions about taking our names off of it, how do we want to make sure that this is truly speaks towards the entire or for the whole collaborative? And that is, I just put here, and again, this is where it could be modified, 2/3 of the HRTC to vote in the affirmative, which means that even no votes would not be eligible. So you'd have to have 2/3 of this body saying, yes, I kind of, for lack of a better term, approve of this project. And then from that, a letter will be submitted. So that's the general process. Again, I just wanted to bring that up. I think we're gonna have to bring it up at another meeting. As you see, here's the draft letter of support, because I'll go over it quickly. We don't want to say that this is even a letter of support, as the language that was brought up in the last meeting. This is a validation. This is who represents the HRTC. I think 2 things to consider for the group is, we just to preface it for a future meeting, is the first list of 5, as you'll see here, are components of the SURF implementation. I guess there is no SURF implementation grant yet, but these are some of the things that the state has highlighted as what they want to see as solid projects for SURF. versus the bottom 5 are clearly more values or principles of SURF. So I think something for this group to consider again at the future meeting is, which one do you like? Do you like the more kind of, I guess, concrete, these are the type of projects that we want to see via SURF, or just the values of SURF? And so long as the projects meet these values. And then lastly, you know, we will kind of list everybody here. So I will stop share screen. Again, I know we're not going to take any action items here because I want to move over to the others. Sorry, Emily, can you make me co-host or add Alicia to as panelist? And we'll move to the other section. But I just wanted to bring it up now since we had a few moments.
Thanks, Jesse. And I'll get us moving into the next conversation. So we had a great conversation at our last meeting, and it was requested that y'all wanted to hear from the consultants who might potentially help with this work. So we have the MARC USA and the UC Center, sorry, USC Center for Economic Development to help you here learn a little bit about the value of developing a theory of change, as well as the role that the MARC and USC would play in helping Orange County develop one, and the role that y'all will be playing as HRTC.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, David, I cut out for a second. Is now when you would like me to jump in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Alicia DeVault. I am with the MARC USA, Inc. I am one of the external evaluators on the Economic Development Fund project, working in partnership with USC. So Jesse had reached out and asked me to kind of give a really brief talk today about the importance of a theory of change and the value of developing one and what that relationship would look like. And so I want to start off recognizing and highlighting that the theory of change is not a requirement by the Economic Development Fund. It's a recommendation that they've put in place. I know that you guys have a lot of other things going on as you work through that process, but there is an importance behind a theory of change that I want to highlight. So theories of change at a high level are a visual way to display your program and what you're working on. And it's a really great opportunity to take a step back and show others that intentional thought has been put into all aspects of the program and the project, ranging from what resources do we need all the way through to what outcomes do we want to see, what changes do we want to see in the community and the people that we serve in the state of California, for example, or even in our region. And so I think the importance of a theory of change is highlighting that expectation, but it's also highlighting that intentional thought has been put into all aspects of the program. Another value of a theory of change is just the opportunity to simply say, hey, what are we assuming? And can we get ahead of assumptions, right? Assumptions sometimes become pain points as we go through the process of developing programs. And so a theory of change is a really good time to take a step back and say, what are we assuming? Could this become a pain point? And can we do anything about it now to keep it from becoming one in the future? And so as we think through the partnership, the potential partnership with the MARC and USC and your region, it would really be a partnership. I am envisioning that process being us getting together and working as a group to come up with your theory of change. So to give you an example, it would be an opportunity for us to come together and, first identify what even goes into the theory of change. What are your inputs? What are your activities? What are your outcomes? And from that, we would help facilitate that conversation, add in our thoughts, help you kind of think through that entire process. And then it would be an opportunity for you to have some reflection and say, did we cover everything we need to, or are there areas where we need to add things? So did we forget about a particular resource, for example? And then once we have everything outlined, it's time to go in and kind of start creating that visual and thinking through the actual flow of the theory of change. So we would help facilitate that conversation as well. So if you had, for example, an activity around building effective partnerships, and one of your outputs was how many actionable economic plans and investments were created, and an outcome is a creation of inclusive and equitable economic plan. The idea is that you guys are kind of putting those in logical steps, but the evaluation team is there to support you and guide you through that process and ask the why questions. Well, why does building an effective partnership lead to an actionable economic plan? What about those two pieces go together? Why are we making that leap? And it kind of helps flesh out the logic behind how all of the pieces work together. And so it would be very much a collaborative process between you as the region with all of that knowledge and us as the evaluators with more of that evaluation knowledge to kind of build this process together and build this map together. So high level, quick summary, that's the importance of the theory of change. That's kind of how the process would look. Jesse, was there anything else you wanted me to highlight on? David, anything before we open up to potential questions?
No, that was it. I think they have the deck, so they understand what it comprises of, but it's, I think, exactly this, like what is going to be the responsibility of the HRTC to do versus, what the MARC would do. So I think with that, are there any kind of questions for the people, again, as we consider whether we want to do our own as a region?
And if I can add to that, sorry, Alicia, if it's okay, and Jesse. So I'm Tracy Shirachi, I'm the CEO of the MARC, but something I just wanted to add to that is, think of this as an opportunity for some form of like strategic plan and technical assistance, right? So the logic model and theory of change is a great way to kind of bring everything together. So all the discussions you've had, all the thought processes you've had around like how you want to implement, how you want to respond to and think about what the state is asking and how you as a region want to be able to organize it. The theory of change and logic model does a fantastic job of bringing that cohesively together. And I always like to refer to it as an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that brings all stakeholders and conversations together and clearly maps out the relationship between all of the discussion points and the aspects of what it is you want to execute. So, as we're encouraging each region as part of the evaluation to do it, it's a great way for you guys to also see, compared to other regions, what are the similarities, what are the differences, and use it as an education point too, to really understand what's going on across the state, right? And cohesively how we as an entire state, right, are able to help each other and support each other all through common goals of what we want to see change in our communities, right? So it's a tool that's been really helpful to do that. And another reason why it's like a foundational piece of the evaluation, but it's also something you guys can use for yourselves too. So consider it as a dual use, right? Don't just only consider it for just this purpose and this particular project, but use it in other capacities. So I just wanted to strongly highlight that. I also want to let you guys know, like, I am a resource here because I live and work here in Orange County too. So you guys have that benefit too. So just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Linda.
Those of us who have worked in our careers with the value of strategic plans, the theory of change model, I think, is just absolutely imperative for SURF, for the HRTC to undertake together, because of the vast diversity of the organizations that are involved in this process. I think the theory of change is going to visually require us to, I pick on you, Gary, again, because it's just a classic example, with your purpose and my purpose. But we're going to be able to visually describe how those purposes intersect and then to what outcome. And that's the value of it. And if anyone has any questions about the applicability and the execution of a good theory of change model, you can talk to my friend Dawn Reese, who's the CEO of the Wooden Floor. And Dawn has become just the spokesperson, and poster child, if you will, for the theory of change. She's magnificently executed it in her organization. And the last thing I'm going to share is that its value is to your board of directors, as well as your immediate teams. This will help describe visually to your board of directors and to your advisors why you're involved in this and what the value of it is, and the other organizations with whom you're collaborating, and then the outcomes that you expect. So it serves a great many purposes.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Do other folks have any comments? Community residents, you want to chime in? Residentes de la comunidad, ¿quieren compartir algún comentario o pregunta? Hearing none. If
David,
I
I
know,
would say then, is there anything that I think this group needs more of before we, eventually pursue the vote of creating a theory of change, utilizing the mark? I mean, this is a follow-up. This is the input. This was the feedback that was provided at the last meeting. Is there anything else this group feels like they need, or do people? I guess we'll have a motion in a second, but I just want to make sure that we are comfortable proceeding with determining whether we want to do this or not. But if there isn't, please speak up now if you feel like there's something else that could supplement this. Okay, then.
I second it, Jesse.
Yeah. That's why. So that's why. Do we have a? I'm saying, do we have a? If someone has a motion, a second to proceed, we will. We'll probably, because of time, just utilize an online survey. We'll give people who weren't present a time to watch the recording. But with that, I think we can. Yeah, sorry. I leave it to the floor to decide whether there's a motion, a second, and then a desire to proceed.
does anyone want to make a motion to?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I thought that there was a motion on the floor, but I make a motion that we proceed with the theory of change methodology, and supported by the resource that's being proposed.
I'll second it.
Perfect. We'll follow up with a survey where we can track the votes, and you'll follow up with more information. I know we're getting close to the hour here. We got a lot accomplished during this hour and a half. Jesse, you have any closing comments, or should we be wrapping up?
No, thank you all. Just again, for those, if you can, and I'll follow up. We have an in-person meeting next week. There's obviously a lot of efficiency by doing things via Zoom, but you lose a lot. And some of this is about building some kind of connection and deeper relationship. So I highly encourage all of you to attend. I'll send the RSVP just so we can feed you well as well. So I think with that, I'll see many of you on the 13th. If not, we'll have their next meeting on the 27th. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having us.